Hi everyone, good morning. Sorry I wasn't here last week, I was sick, but thank God, feeling much better. So thank you to everyone who came out today and braved the cold weather to come learn. I grew up in Montreal, so this is like summer for me. It's okay, for people it's cold, I appreciate people made it. Okay, so today we're going to continue our series of troubling texts in the Torah. And last time we talked about slavery, today we're going to talk about sota. Again, a text I would say that is very challenging. It's one when students come up and ask questions, you're like, no, gotta go over here. don't want to deal with that. But I figured we do kind of especially with an adult audience, have a chance to really grapple with this text, look at different mefarshim, the way different people, different commentators have struggled with this, from the Rambam all the way to modern scholars. And we'll have a chance to really engage with the issue. Here, once they can pass around. And have a chance to really engage with this text together, trying to make it interactive, and we'll look at the ways that really people before us have also struggled with this text, to see if we can come to, if not some answers, at least a way to kind of resolve or get validation for some of our questions, and seeing that these are the same questions asked by many of the mefarshim. So what we're going to do to start off is we're actually going to look at the actual text in Tanakh that deals with sota. So I'm going to ask everyone to kind of forget everything you know about, maybe midrashim or things you've seen in the Gemara, and just kind of looking at the text in Tanakh, in the Bible. Let's see if we can figure out what exactly is going on, and then kind of raise all the questions we have about it, and then we'll kind of see different ways that different mefarshim or different commentators struggle with it. Okay, so we're going to start on page 1, source 1. So this is Bamidbar Parakeh. So there's Hebrew and there's English. I'm going to read parts of the Hebrew. You guys can follow along in whichever one you prefer. And then we'll have a chance to, again, any questions you think of, keep in the back of your heads. And once we finish reading through the text, we'll have a chance to talk out all of the different questions that are asked. Okay. So it starts off talking a little bit about, here's the command about what happens in a situation where a woman is suspected of adultery. So here we go. So we'll start Hashi Pasuk Yud Gimel, the second pasuk. It says, "V'shachab ish ota shifat zera v'ne'elam meinei isha v'nistara v'hi nitmeya v'ed ein ba v'hi lo nitpasha." Right. So we have a situation where a woman has committed adultery, and the situation here is there are no witnesses, right? There's no way to actually do this through a formal court. There are no witnesses in this case, and she was not, and and she was not caught in the act, right? We haven't found a way, so we don't have any kind of concrete proof in this situation. Okay, so let's keep going. Pasuk Yudalad. Arvar lav ruach kina v'kinei ishto v'hi nitma'a. Arvar lav ruach kina v'kinei ishto v'hi lo nitma'a. So we have now, the husband is overcome with jealousy, and we have two options. One, that he's jealous because what? Actually, she did commit adultery. Or number two, he's jealous and what? She actually didn't. His suspicions are unfounded in this case. Either way, in both those cases, it says, Pasuk Teva.
Either way, she's, at least at the beginning, she's getting the short end of the stick.
Yes.
Because everything depends on his suspicions.
For sure. Keep questions in mind, right? This is great. And then once we go, let's read through it first, and then we'll kind of bring out all of our questions. But yeah, for sure, it's definitely something to put on our radar. Okay, so Pasuk Tedvav, what happens then? Right, again, whether it actually happened or it didn't happen. V'hivia isha ishto el kohen, v'hivia es korbana aleha asri taifa ken asarim lo yitzak alav shemen v'lo yitzen alav abona ki minchat hinatu minchat zikaron maskeret avon. So he brings her to the kohen. There's a special korban that she brings, or that is brought, that doesn't have any spices or anything on that. It's supposed to be almost like a sin offering, like reminiscent of the sin of which she's been accused. The Kohen kind of brings her before. She stands before the Kohen. So we'll look at Pasuk Yud Zayin. Then the Kohen takes water, right? V'lakacha Kohen mayim kedoshim b'kli cheres u'min ha'afar asher yeh b'karkar ha'mishkan yikach Kohen v'natan ha'mayim. So he takes dust or earth, right, from the floor of the Mishkan, and puts it in water. We'll come back to that water in a second. Pasuk Yudchet. V'heimida kohen isha lifnei Hashem ufara et rosh ha'isha v'natan al kapea et minchat hazikaron minchat kinat hi u'biyad kohen yu mei hamarim hamarim. So now there's this whole kind of the disgrace of her publicly, right, happens in the ceremony. Her hair is unraveled or uncovered. She has to hold the special mincha, and the kohen is holding the water. And then we have the oath in Pasuk Yutat and Pasuk Chaf. Vishpia ota Kohen. The Kohen makes her take an oath. V'amar ha'isha im lo shacha b'ishotach im lo shatita tum'at tachat isha hanakim mimi hamarim. Hamarim hama'arivim ha'eleh. So if you didn't do anything wrong, you're going to be innocent. Like nothing. This water is not going to harm you. V'at ki shatit tachat ishach v'kinitmet beiten ish bach et shechvato mibaladi ishach. But at the same time, if you actually have committed it. If you have committed in adultery, then the following will happen. Pasuk Chabal from the bottom of the page. V'shpia kohen ta'isha b'shvuat ha'elah. V'amar kohen l'isha yiten Hashem otach la'alal l'shvua b'toch amech. V'tit Hashem ad yerachach nofelet v'bitnech tzava. And if you actually did something wrong, then you will, be like a curse among your people, and then your yerach will fall, and your beten will swell. And unclear exactly what's going on over here, right? Yerach might be euphemism for either like a sexual organ, or here like bitnech, again, unclear. Modern scholars also are unclear, just talking about, she would become sterile, it's just talking about a miscarriage, like, for some reason, I remember as a kid learning that she explodes, right? But I think that's just because you read what Mitchell says too much, and then things get confusing. But unclear exactly what's going to happen. But something with yerach and beten. So we turn the page over. It goes on, right? The same thing, like in pasuk chabet, right? Oh, this is what's going to happen to you. Your beten will fall in your yerach. V'amra ha'isha amin amin. And she has to say, amen, amen, right? I accept the conditions of, this shvuah. If I did something wrong, these horrible things will happen. If not, I will be, innocent. He writes it down, pasuk chav gimel, right into the water, and dissolves it into he writes the curse down, right? The Allah, or the shvuah here, and he dissolves it into the water that already has a dust from the Mishkan. And pasuk chav daled, and she drinks it, v'yishkat ha'ishat mei hamarim hamaririm, uba hamayim hamarim, Limarim. Then we'll just skip ahead a little bit, then the offering is brought, the korban is brought, and then, if anyone else needs so then the korban is brought, and then the last thing we'll mention, right, and then it just goes over again what's going to happen, right? If she did something wrong, horrible things will happen. If not, interesting, to add something in pasuk Chavched, pasuk 28, imloni t'ma'ah ha'isha tuhoraki v'nitzav v'nizra zara, right? If she's innocent, what's going to happen with the water? She now will become pregnant, right? And now will allow her to become pregnant. And then it ends off with saying this is Torah Takina, right? This is exactly what you do in this situation when the husband has this type of suspicion about his wife. And we'll kind of stop there. Okay. Questions, comments, concerns, things that bother you? Yes?
I have to say, I studied this Masechet with a group of women who are learning Mishnah. So, now I notice in Chumash, a lot, if not most of the text spends its time on the ceremony, what's done and what's done after this, what's done after that. But I remember from the Mishnah, a lot more time is spent on what happens prior to the ceremony. First of all, trying to find some kind of proof of the woman. And there are all kinds of things that happen in the Mishnah's interpretation, that I think it tries to help the woman as much as possible before you get to the point where she's brought to the Kohen and has to go through this humiliating.
Well, that's a great point. And kind of what we're going to see after this is that almost exactly that. That in the Mishnah, the ritual kind of dramatically changes. I think this ties into kind of what we spoke about last time a little bit with slavery, with a few other examples with Goel Hadam, with capital punishment in the Torah, that Chazal, the rabbis themselves, we see a lot of times even ayin tachat ayin, right? An eye for an eye. Yeah. The rabbis a lot of times will, whether it's responding to other internal ethics in the Torah of Tzelem Elokim or things like that, will kind of try to limit or legislate certain things in Tanakh that don't seem to work with their current reality, right, in the Gemara. And whether it's, again, to try to, either say that we're not going to do these things, anymore, or to try to adjust them or add on different things, as we'll see, to make it something that they're more comfortable with, or even seems to them to be more in line with the spirit of the Torah. So that's something we will have a chance to see in the Mishnah. So a great point. Yeah?
I came a little late. I'm sorry if you mentioned this or said something about it before. Did this ever really happen? Did it ever occur?
So great question also, right? Is this something that, was happening all the time, or is it something more like Ben Sorer, right, or Morer? So that's something
and if
that
so, do we know why this was brought? If it never happened.
Right. Excellent point, right? So why is this kind of included then? So we'll have a chance to talk about that also. Great. Other questions? Yeah.
as we kind of continue on your question, there's a lot of detail written about how to do it as if we're going to need to replicate it at some point. So it seems like if it's something that's purely theoretical, why does the Torah and then the Mishnah and Gemara speak so much about something that's
For
not
sure.
going to happen?
And answer your question right. Is something that's theoretical or something that was an option then later on kind of gets legislated out, so
Yeah.
also something to think about. So anything else that seems bothersome though about the ritual? Yeah.
So it just seems like, how could whoever wrote this, like, forecast this weird miracle that may or may not happen? Is that's the way we're gonna prove something?
For sure, right? It seems something that very kind of unlike the spirit of the Torah, right? There's no, what's missing for this, right? There's no, right, evidence, there's no witnesses, right? There's just, we're gonna do a miracle to see if you're guilty or not. There doesn't seem to be anything else like this, right, in the Torah, right, in Chumash, that seems to, that's not how we decide things, right? Right, so great, yeah, great question. Other issues, yeah.
The opening pasuk makes it, sets the scenario as if, not as if, sets the scenario that the woman has violated the marriage bond, and just there are no witnesses. The second or third pasuk then seems to shift and says whether she did it or whether she didn't.
Right, for sure, right, so, and again, kind of seeing, right, definitely that contradiction, and also that idea that, it's not just about, oh, she's guilty for sure and we can't prove it. It seems to include, right, in the third pasuk that even if it's just the husband has suspicions, he's allowed to bring her, what if this is someone who's emotionally abusive, who's dragging her out for, to this type of ceremony? Why doesn't she have kind of a say? Yeah.
Going along with that, usually with halakha involved in women in marriage, the woman is her own aid. And that is weird that she's not here.
Right, for sure. She isn't really given a chance, right, to respond. The only time, right, we see the woman responding here is when she says, Amen, Amen, right, to the curse. It's interesting, when I was doing research for this, in the Dead Sea Scrolls, in something called the Damascus document, it has a similar kind of ritual to Sota, and there actually we do have kind of a line of text where the woman seems to respond, and she seems to, and if she says, she was raped, then it seems that she is kind of let off. So some scholars will point out that, like, in that version of the Dead Sea Scrolls, at least, where if this was one of the, separate kind of sects, like there it seemed to give the woman more of a voice, but at least here, right, there doesn't seem to be that she is allowed to respond, defend herself, or anything like that, yeah.
Also, I mean, when the same one is the husband is never questioned.
Right. It seems to be, again, that, we're just taking his word for it, she's the only one really who seems to be getting in trouble, not even about the husband, who also seems to be missing here, right? The adulterer, right? Or potential, right, accused adulterer, right? It's only her that's being dragged. We don't have a similar situation where a man who's accused of this is being brought forward. The reason for that also is because, at least at this stage, right, there's no issue with polygamy, at least for Ashkenazim, right, until Middle Ages, right, later on for Sephardim. So unless, like, for the man, right, in that case, unless she's attached to someone else, right, there is that option for polygamy, but for her, right, she's the one who's being brought forward in this case. Anything else that bothers people? Yeah.
I mean, I think that the whole process, even if she is found innocent, is still disturbing. That she still has to go through the whole process, and it's embarrassing, and it's in front of other people.
Right.
The Cohen, and she still has to say, I mean that, like, she is, like, kind of accepting her fate, even if she may know that she's innocent the whole time. Like, why should she have to go through all of this?
For sure, right? Why is there almost like a nature of this humiliation, right, in this public ritual, especially if it's something that she's not, that she actually hasn't done, maybe, right, in this case. Great. So, yeah.
The magical pregnancy?
Yes, also strange, right? Lots of things that seem to be going on here that don't seem to work. But number one, suddenly, like, what's going on with the water? We spoke about that before. Like, does she explode? Is it like she's becoming sterile, or she's, having a miscarriage? But the same thing, will cause her to become pregnant, like, magically. Like, what exactly is this talking about? So that's definitely something also that seems to be strange. And I think we brought up kind of some of the major issues, right? Number one, this seems very unlike what the Torah usually does. No evidence, no witnesses. There seems to be this almost kind of magic, trial by ordeal nature, right, going on here that's very foreign to what else we see in the Torah. What's going on with the punishment that causes pregnancy? The whole thing also seems very strange. She can't defend herself. Also, there's no test for the man, right? Doesn't seem to be very egalitarian, right, in this case. And also, it's interesting, the idea of the drinking of the water, right, reminds us of what other story in Tanakh, which is probably written Dafka in a way to parallel this. Where else do we have kind of drinking of the water and then
Egel HaZahav.
Very good, right? And Egel HaZahav, which again is an interesting thing, right? That after Moshe kind of he grinds up the lufot and everyone drinks the water. That's how the Levium know who to kill. And again, a similar thing is probably also because the idea there is also adultery, right? Kind of, right? A mashal, right? That like we are, by sitting with Egel HaZahav, the same similar thing of breaking that relationship with God. But again, seems very strange. So what exactly is going on over here? So what we're going to try to do is to see, we're going to look through, as we said, kind of look starting off, as people mentioned, right, we're going to look at the Mishnah, and we'll see kind of how this radically changes a lot once we see how this ritual what this ritual kind of turns into the time period of the Mishnah and the Gemara, what Chazal do with it. We'll also look at a range of scholars, right, from medieval to modern academic scholars, and see if any of this can kind of reinterpret this ritual or bring it in a different light. So the first thing I wanted to show before we get to looking at the time period of the Mishnah is just putting it a little bit in an ancient Near East context. So if you look at source 2 on page 2, I gave you an excerpt from the Code of Hammurabi, right, which is the Babylonian, Mesopotamian kind of code of law, predates the Torah a little bit. And often by comparing certain, legal areas of the Torah or legal sections of the Torah to the Code of Hammurabi, we can see a little bit, especially from highlighting the differences, we can see a lot of times how perhaps the Torah was, again, depending how you want to frame it, responding or a lot of times you'll see there's a parallel, but the Torah's version seems to be holding it to almost like a higher ethical standard or adapting it or changing it in a few key ways. So what's interesting here is there's a similar ritual in the Code of Hammurabi, but we'll see how there's important distinctions between this and between what we just read in Sefer Bamidbar. So if you look at source 2, it actually gives two options. It says, if a finger has been pointed at a man's wife because of another man, but she has not been caught lying with that other man, she shall leap into the river for the sake of her husband. Second option, if a man's wife was accused by her husband, it seems like in the first one it's more that if other people accuse her, but if she's accused by her husband, but she was not caught while lying with another man, she shall make an oath by the god and return home. So here we have kind of water and oath. So kind of responses to this, what differences do we see here? I'll just point out the similarities, right? In both of these, both this and in Bamidbar, we have something involving water, right? We have some kind of trial involving water and something involving an oath, except here in the Code of Hammurabi, they seem to be separate, while they seem to be combined, right, in what's going on in Bamidbar. But what seem to be important distinctions? Any thoughts on that? Yeah.
Who accuses her?
Who accuses her? Okay, interesting, right? Whether it's the husband or anyone else. Yeah.
In the Code of Hammurabi, it seems like she's taking the initiative, like she's leaping into the water rather than someone else putting the water on her and doing
Okay, good, right. She's not like being thrown into the water, right? She's taking that initiative. Anything else, though? What else seems to be kind of a distinction here?
She makes an oath, she's let off more easily here than in the Torah.
Okay, interesting, right? All she has to do is kind of make an oath, right? Then she can go home. Yeah.
No provision for if she actually did it.
Interesting, right? Yeah. Also, right, what happens if she actually did it? We're kind of leaving that out. And the one thing I'll add, though, which I think is an important also distinction to think about, is in the Code of Hammurabi, right? If she jumps into that water, right, what's going to happen to her? Probably, she'll drown, right? Unless she's, I don't know, a good swimmer or anything like that, right? It sounds much more like this.
No, not necessarily. It's a trial by ordeal.
Right, yeah.
If she survives it, she didn't do it.
Right,
If she drowns, she's guilty.
Right. Right. So again, right. So for the sense of a trial, exactly, right? It's a trial by ordeal, right? The ordeal will show whether or not she survived it. But there is a little bit more of an inherent danger in this one, right? Perhaps this is what some scholars point out also, that, by her jumping in the water here, there is a sort of inherent danger of what she's doing. While in the biblical account, while in Bamidbar, if you think about it, right, we all know, because I feel like we learn, as little kids, if she drinks the water, something horrible will happen. But if you think about it at its first glance, what is she drinking when she's drinking the water? It's water with dust, right? So ultimately there isn't any inherent danger in the water that she's drinking in Bamidbar. The fact that the water might hurt her is what's miraculous, right? Like the miracle is that something that isn't harmful could become harmful. But that's something that scholars point out here is almost a distinction, that the Torah is almost, there's a similarity of something involving water or shvuah that get combined, but here there's much more danger kind of for the woman. While in the option in Bamidbar, it's almost like we're not going to make her do something that is inherently dangerous, that's going to, hurt her. We'll talk about this after, kind of like why add in, this, why is the miracle that the water itself might hurt her, but she is doing something that at first glance might not harm her. So that's kind, yeah,
But what about the public humiliation
Yeah,
that
for
she
sure.
feels having to go through this?
100%. So that is not, we've definitely not solved that yet, and we still have to see, and I don't know if we will be able to solve that, but that's definitely kind of still an open question. But one thing here is at least the danger a little bit has been mitigated. What's interesting also, when it comes to this idea, also when we think about the idea of a shvuah, which I think is important also in the sense of what we saw really in Bamidbar, the shvuah itself also is not something that's inherently dangerous, but it's something in that time period, or at least kind of even moving on a little bit later, that was seen as so serious. Right? If you took a shvuah right against the name of God or anything like that, or if you said amen to it or anything like that, that was considered serious enough that we wouldn't think anyone would lie about that. And to the extent, and we'll talk about this also at the end, we'll see something by Rabbi Hanan Samet, who talks a little bit about this idea of sota also, that is the goal here to kind of figure out innocence or guilt? Is the goal punishment, or is the goal to kind of allow the family to stay together and move on? Which is an interesting thing to think of also, and what would allow that? So almost that here, either we think she wouldn't lie, right, over a shvuah, like she would admit the truth, because who would break a shvuah? Or that kind of social norm that nobody would break a shvuah would allow someone, like even if she was lying, to be like, there's no way she lied, because nobody would lie like about a shvuah, and that would kind of allow it to remain. So again, we'll come back to that a little bit later, but things to think about as well. This idea of a shvuah or water, yeah.
But when you say it'll allow the family to keep together,
Yeah.
like, what trust is there?
100%. No, and that's I think the challenge on that also. So stay, we'll come back to that at the end, and we'll see kind of that's more of kind of one of the ideas shared at the end, kind of by more modern scholars. But I think there's a lot of holes in each. The problem with sota is every answer you have, there's like 5 challenges against it, which we'll be able to see. Yeah.
I just have a question about
Sure.
Ruach Kinah.
Yeah.
I mean, you wake up one morning and you have Ruach Kinah, or they're saying he has something to base it on? Because it's very odd to.
That's why I would say that according to Bamidbar, what's troublesome when you look at the text of Tanakh, it really kind of seems very arbitrary, right? That it's like, oh, Ruach Kinah, like, what if he's emotionally abusive, or what if it really seems like there's an issue? But we'll see in the Mishnah, which we'll look at now, or in like a minute, that the Mishnah tries to say Ruach Kinah as no, like it tries to reframe it in a legal aspect, that like there had to be witnesses, or there really had to be suspicion, which is what, sorry, remind me your name.
Arona.
What Arona was saying kind of before, and we'll see that kind of coming together. But that's that question, right? And we'll see that's what Chazal are a little bit nervous about also. The one thing I want to show you before we actually look at the text of the Mishnah is if you look on page 3. And again, this is interesting to add to the discussion. I don't know if it makes it better or worse. Again, the issue with any answer for Sota. This is the more academic scholar, right, Jacob Milgram. So he kind of points out, you can look at source number 3, going back to the issue of humiliation that people brought up, like why does the ritual itself have to be so humiliating? So again, just something that might be helpful for our discussion. He talks about how in the time period, at least in the ancient Near East, or in the time period where the Torah was given, I think we could see this today in a lot of kind of third world countries, there's an idea of kind of if a woman is accused, even if there's no merit to that accusation, a lot of times people or cultures will take that into their own hands, right? You have issues of honor killings or things like that, and people won't wait for any sense of trial or edim or ceremony. They are just going to kind of the mob mentality. So he talks about here how perhaps, right, perhaps here the idea is to protect a suspected but unproven adulteress from the vengeance of an irate husband or community by mandating that God will decide her case. So he's coming from a little bit of a different, worldview here. But one thing I think that could perhaps impact our discussion is you have an angry community or an angry husband, and we're not saying they're right? But right now, the woman's life is in danger, right? They're going to kind of avenge her, mob mentality, anything like that. So almost perhaps the goal of the humiliation, again, I also have a lot of issues with this, right? But the goal is that the community sees that they're outraged. The mob, like pitchfork holding mob, gets their anger kind of, okay, like there's this big public ceremony, still doesn't help the woman, but at least at the end of it, right, there'll be some sort of, she's not being thrown into the river, right? At least she's not being asked to do anything dangerous. We'll talk about, again, like perhaps the miracle would allow for, something terrible to happen if she was actually guilty. But at the base value, she's not being asked to drink acid, right? She's not being thrown in the river. She's being asked to drink water and dust. Is it humiliating? 100%. But at least at the end, let's assume nothing happens, right? And the water doesn't cause any issues or anything like that. the community will say like, all right, fine, like God has spoken, and she, her innocence has now been stamped by God, and the community goes back to what they're doing, and she's saved. So again, it doesn't really help her. I would say it's definitely not something anyone would sign up for. We'll talk about kind of at the end why someone might choose to do this. But at the same time, perhaps it avoids that mob mentality. Again, I don't think this is a perfect answer, but something interesting to kind of bring in nonetheless. Yes?
But when she's drinking something that's not harmful, but they're also uncovering her hair, which is a very shameful.
100%. Yeah, and actually we'll see the Rambam at the end actually talks about how it's not actually the fact that she might explode or her get the sterility or the miscarriage or anything after that is the punishment. He actually says the worst part is the humiliation, and we'll talk. He actually frames it more as a deterrent, but we'll talk kind of about that a little bit later on. That's also a great point. Okay, so let's look at the Mishnah. So section 3 on page 3. So I want to show you here was the ceremony that we just read in Tanakh gets kind of radically changed once Chazal kind of get their hands on it, right, in the time period of the Mishnah. And it's interesting because I think they have a lot of the same hesitations, or they're bothered by a lot of the same things that we are bothered by. And they try to reframe it again in a more legalistic context. I think we'll look at 3 ways that they do that. And I think that a lot of this, again, could be the same thing we've seen them do before, right? Whether it's with the issue of Goel Hadam or with capital punishment or of Ayin Tachat Ayin, seeing that, there's other, ethical mandates in the Torah, B'Tselem Elokim, Resitim B'Nei Yishar B'Hatov, right, different other options that allowed them or gave them that opening to kind of legislate a little bit against it, kind of going back to last week's or 2 weeks ago discussion about slavery as well. Okay, so the first thing they do is they add in kinui and stira, right, and they add in this aspect that it's not just about a unbased accusation, we're going to drag her through this, but there needs to be actual kind of almost halachic evidence. There needs to be witnesses, there needs to be a warning, there needs to be some cause. And at least this kind of narrows it down to, it's not great, but any woman being brought forth, it's not a random accusation, right? It's something where there was at least some sort of cause. So if we look at a few, just 2 examples here in sources 4 and 5 on page 3, so the Mishnah says, right, in the first Mishnah, Rabbi Eliezer Omer matne la al pi shnayim umashke al pi echad or al pi atzmo. Rabbi Yeshua Omer matne la al pi shnayim umashke al pi shnayim. Right. So machloket about how many witnesses, but this idea that she has to be, the first aspect over here that she has, it actually takes the word makneh, right? The idea of kinuri, or that before we thought it was just the husband was jealous, right? But now the Mishnah comes and adds on that it's not just a random thing of jealousy, but he has to actually have warned her before witnesses, right, not to kind of be with that person. There has to also be this idea of, right, if he warns her before 2 witnesses, and then after she goes and secludes herself, that's when this ritual can happen. Like, it's not something that's totally random. There has to be a warning, there has to be witnesses. If you look at Mishnah Bet, right, he talks about also, it's not just about the warning, but then also the idea of her being by herself, right, this idea of seclusion, right, and we'll just read the underlined part, Asa imo lebeit haseter, v'shata imo kedei tuma, asura lebeitav, asura lechol betruma. Right, it talks about, again, if she was married, right, to a Kohen in this case. There's this idea that, again, it's not just about, he warns her, I don't want you to be with this person, which again, right, a little bit uncomfortable, like, warning her not to hang out with this person, but again, some sort of suspicion. But not just that, but she's alone with someone else for long enough for them to have committed adultery, and with Edom, with witnesses, that's when this has to happen. So almost taking those words, right, that we saw in Bamidbar, right, of Nistara and Kina, which the pshat is really that the matter was, it's hidden from the eyes of her husband, or a spirit of jealousy, and it reframes it to almost legal terms, right? There have to be witnesses, there has to be warning, she has to be alone. So that, again, kind of as we said before, limits what's going to happen, and hopefully adds a certain element of cause. Whether that's helpful or not, kind of reframes it in a worldview again. I think going back to what we said before, this seems like, a random trial by ordeal, miraculous kind of trial in halakha. We like witnesses, we like a beit din, we like there to be a legal aspect, and that's kind of how Chazal here are framing it. Another aspect we'll add in B, if you look in the bottom page, source number 6, drinking the water is optional. This is something that I remember when I was learning on the Mishnayot in Sota, I found, again, kind of going back to you learn something one way as a kid, then you kind of relearn it, right? That, I feel like I always had this image of the woman being dragged kind of to the trial, like against her will, not wanting to do it. But really, according to Chazal, she can opt out. She doesn't have to go through this ceremony. And there's actually a few different options, because on one end, we have her accused of adultery, but we have no proof, right? So there's a few options really of what could happen. Either the husband can, just divorce her and give her a ketubah, right, and give her the financial payment. And if he really believes, this happened and he wants to divorce her, he can divorce her, and that's ended. Or the option here, she doesn't have to drink. She can basically take a divorce and forfeit her ketubah and forfeit the financial settlement, and then she doesn't have to go through the ritual. It's almost like Kilu, not exactly admitting guilt that there would be any, huge form of punishment, of death or lashes or anything like that, but she gives up her ketubah, or financial penalty, and they get divorced, and they both move on with their lives, and that's that. It's not always something that's going to have to happen, right? It says over here, right, in the source number 6, we can look through the idea that, giving different examples of women who don't have to drink and don't have to take their ketubah, right? So again, that she's not being dragged forward. If she doesn't want to do this, she doesn't have to, even though it means losing the financial penalty. And it's an interesting thing to start to think about, like, what would make her kind of want to go through with this. So almost I think this kind of narrows down, we spoke about more, like how often was this actually done? We don't have, like real, statistics at it, but would women, how many women were actually doing this if it was optional? And if it was optional, like, who would want to go through such a humiliating kind of ceremony? And we'll talk kind of about that at the end. I saw some hands. Yeah.
I just had a question.
Yeah.
Why would she opt to get divorced and not take the ketubah versus getting divorced and taking?
Oh, so I think that's just like a question of like her choice versus his choice, right?
Okay.
Like if he wants to divorce her and give her the ketubah, right? She can't later on we have like, I know you can't divorce someone against their will, but at least at this point, right, he could divorce her whether she wants to or not, but at least she gets the financial payment. But that's like his choice. But let's say the other choice is if he's like, no, like I want to do the ritual, and she's like, I'm not doing that. She can just be like, I'm taking the ketubah. I'm taking the divorce without the financial payment and walk away. Yeah,
That's a punishment too, because
for sure.
the women economically didn't have many choices, and if she was left without the ketubah money,
Yeah. Agreed.
she was in a lousy position.
Agreed, and I would say, right, it still doesn't seem so fair,
No,
right?
it is a
And
punishment.
that's, I think, right, as I said, every answer has like 5 problems with it, but at least, she isn't being dragged through this very humiliating ritual, but, right, it's not perfect. Now she's, maybe she's independently wealthy, or she has money from, the family before, she's able to keep separate, but maybe now she's going to be poor. So again, very hard to kind of balance that out. But again, it's interesting how they change it. If we turn the page over to page 4, the other thing that Chazal added, which is interesting, is they kind of adapt the punishment so it's no longer one-sided. Interesting, right? We had said, how come she's being punished and not the adulterer? And also, how come the husband can just make a blanket accusation like he has no consequences? So Chazal kind of changed that a little bit. So in source number 7, it adds in, right, in the Mishnah, Kishem she'amayim botkim ota, kach hamayim botkim oto, right? Shnei amar, gives gzeir shava, uba'u, ba'u, right? Then also, right, Kishem she'asura lebal, kach asura leboel, right? So it adds this idea that the water doesn't just test her. When she's drinking the water, if something, bad would happen to her and she would get sick and that punishment would happen, at the same time, that would happen to the adulterer, right? Which is interesting that it kind of like extends that idea. And then the idea also that, it adds in kind of another deterrent that after she wouldn't be able to then marry, right? I think even if she took the, if she, allowed herself to get divorced, but in this situation also, right, she wouldn't be able to then marry the person after, right, the person that she was accused with, but or the person, right, that she had sinned with. But here the idea that doesn't just test her, but even though the adulterer is not going through the same humiliating ceremony, Chazal found a way to like extend it, right? That like he also, whether this happened or not, right, they believed that this would be able to impact him as well. And then talking about the husband, if you look in source 8, where the Gemara in Sota adds in the idea, like Tana Rabbanan v'nakeh ha'ish me'avon, right? It said the last line, I don't know actually if we read this, but the last line in Bamidbar, if you look back to the text, it said like, the husband will be like free of guilt, but the woman's going to be guilty. Okay, so then Chazal kind of spin that around. They say v'nakeh ha'ish me'avon. When is he going to be clean of sin? When is he considered free, innocent? Bisman sha'ish menukah me'avon. Hamayim botkim et ishto. Ein ha'ish menukah me'avon. Ein hamayim botkim et ishto. Right? So this idea that, it's dependent. You can't just make blanket accusations unless it sounds like, like he was in glass houses, right, don't throw stones, but the idea that he can't kind of make, this whole ceremony is not gonna work in the eyes of Chazal unless he's really almost like Lishma, doing it for the right reasons, he's not, emotionally abusive, it's not coming from any other place, that he is really nakem me'avon. So it's, again, I don't know if it solves, again, we're throwing out different things here, but it does seem that they were bothered, Chazal were bothered by the same idea, that how come, she's being punished and no one else. But then interesting thing in source number 9, the idea is similar almost to, we'll see, so, this comes up in other situations with capital punishment and things like that, but Misharabu hamenafim, pasgu hamayim hamarim, for Rabban Yochanan ben Zakkai hipsikan. That like when adultery became very rampant and very widespread, a little bit right before the Korban, they got rid of this ceremony. So again, interesting idea that kind of almost like it's too much adultery, so we're not going to be able to use this anymore, and it's not worth kind of having the ceremony or something. But again, that this was something that they were able to, or they were comfortable, kind of stopping at a certain point when they felt that whatever the goal had been, whether it was a deterrent or anything else, didn't seem to be working. That like now that adultery is so widespread, we're not going to actually use this kind of ceremony anymore. But again, I think it's interesting here that, and I should just do one more, then we'll bring it together. Another kind of aspect, so we've seen so far, they add in the witnesses and the legal aspect, they try to make it a little bit more egalitarian, they make it optional, and finally in letter D, in the bottom of page 4, they add in this idea that the punishment doesn't have to happen right away. This is an interesting thing we talked about, what's exactly happening to her, is the water actually going to hurt her or not? So they added in this aspect that, maybe it's not going to happen right away. Maybe it's going to happen much later on. And that's kind of like the big kind of, I would say kind of like in more academic sources, the more, controversial question would be, is it that the miracle is going to happen for sure, that God intended for this miracle to happen, and actually, her, Yarach and her Batzana would fall apart? Or was this set up in a way, by God that, people would believe that it would happen, whether or not this actually happened, or in allowing kind of for a certain opening. We'll see where this train of thought can take us as well. But here it's interesting. It talks about this. It ties in a little bit to women in Talmud Torah, which is interesting. It talks about how if she had merit, we'll read this together in source 10. Im yesh la zchut, hayta tolala. Yesh zchut tola shana achat, yesh zchut tola shnei shanim, yesh zchut tola shalosh shanim. But like the punishment, like again, going back to when I was a kid, you think it's going to happen like right away. But this could be something that happens a year later, 2 years later, 3 years later, if she had some sort of independent merit. It's interesting, actually, I didn't underline it, but at the end, this is one of the reasons Ben Azai says you're chayav to teach your daughter Torah. So she should know this, that, when, in case she's an adulterer and this happens, that, that the reason why the thing didn't happen right away isn't because it doesn't work, right? Going back to our question before, like, does it work, or are you supposed to think that it works? Like, how exactly does that play out? But don't think it didn't work because like you got away with it or the trial doesn't work, but because there was a delay, kind of like of 2-3 years, doesn't have to happen immediately.
The problem with that is that if she was indeed an adulteress, she's a sort of to her husband.
Yes, for sure. Well, I would say if she was a proven adulterer, and that's the question here, right? Like, if there were Edom, then for sure we would do this. The whole problem, which I think, actually, thank you for bringing that up, is this whole situation is a situation of safek, right, of doubt, where we're not sure what to do here, right? And right, it's a safek if she's allowed to her husband or not. But again, if we don't have proof at this point, we could still, within the halachic reality, I wouldn't say innocent until proven guilty, but at least she hasn't been proven for sure to be an adulterer, so we don't have to take that step yet. But also, right, what if she really is guilty? Yeah.
But then it's hanging over her head for a long period of time.
Right.
So how are people looking at her, from that perspective?
For sure. And actually, and to kind of build off on that, if you turn the page over on page 5, I just added source 11 that kind of shows the other side, that Rabbi Shimon actually did not like that, because he's like, forget about the women who actually sinned and got away with it, right? What if you're innocent, then like everyone's going to be like, oh, you're not totally innocent, just let's see what happens in 3 years, So like that doesn't...
If the woman was innocent, why wouldn't she want to get it over with right away?
Right, for sure. And I think this is perhaps responding to an issue that, again, and this is going back to the more controversial question, when she drank the water, again, what is she's drinking here, like water and dust and like a little bit of ink, like the miracle is that something should happen. Like, what if nothing practically did happen? Like, if I would make that right now and drink that, nothing would happen. Like, it's not actually going to hurt you. So again, kind of like, perhaps this was like one of the reasons they had to say, like this isn't gonna happen for 2 years or 3 years or for reasons like that. But again, if you look in source 11, Rav Shimon is very upset by this. He's like, no, like we should not be saying that like it's gonna delay, kind of almost similar to what you were saying. Rabbi Shimon Omer, ein zchut toleh b'mayim hamarim, v'im ata omer zchut toleh b'mayim hamarim, madheh ata et hamayim b'fnei kol hanashim ashatot, u'motzi ata shem ra al hatorot sheshatu. Right, like if you start saying there's a delay, you're being motzi shem ra on all the women who are innocent, who drank the water, nothing happened. Everyone's gonna be like, oh, you're not innocent. Like let's see what happens in 3 years, right? And so almost again, if the whole point is to clear her name, where it's like now officially stamped by God that she is innocent, like she went through this trial, now everyone can say she's innocent, can we or can we not? And that perhaps raises more issues. Yeah.
And she can use this delay tool as sort of vengeance against her husband and say, oh, you think I'm guilty? All right, wait.
Right, no, and again, like I think, right, there's a lot of issues kind of here with that. So I want to kind of bring this together. We're going to look at some modern sources also. The last point I want to make with Chazal is we've made the argument that, this is a lot of academic people make the same argument as well, that Chazal were bothered by the same issues that we were and tried to kind of limit the ritual, at least make it a little bit more, make it optional, make it more legalistic, right? We're going to add in Adim and things like that. We're going to, make it a little bit more egalitarian, things like that. But at the same time, it's important to point out they also kind of make the ritual a little bit harsher than it is in Sefer Bamidbar. And I put that in section E on the bottom of page 5. We'll just summarize these together, sources 12, 13, and 14. It talks about, it kind of like expands it a little bit more. The one it talks about, in the text it says Ufarai, Rosha Isha, right? It unravels or uncovers her hair. It adds on that basically he would like rip her clothes, right? That actually she's like basically being half undressed, like in the way of ripping her clothes. The Mishnah and Vav again talks about how did we remove any ornaments she had, any jewelry, and specifically the rope that is used kind of, or like a rope that's kind of tied around her. It says specifically we use Egyptian rope, right? And the idea of using the Egyptian rope. Why? Because she has done kind of like this act of Mitzrayim, like again, kind of like adding in this harshness to sort of, again, like not to play down this idea of adultery that she's been accused of. Again, all the issues still remain. What if she didn't do it, et cetera, right? But again, kind of making it harsher. And even though it's interesting in source 14, even the offering, right? She has to hold the korban, and we put it in basically a heavy bowl, so she'll get tired, right? It's almost like looking for ways to make the ritual worse. So at the same time, just to show both sides. On one hand, Chazal are trying to respond to a lot of the issues, but they're not taking away from the fact that this really was a very humiliating, a very very intense ritual that she was going through. Okay, so turn the page over. We'll go to a few final sources to kind of wrap up, like in source 6. And what I wanted to kind of talk about to kind of bring this all together, and as we look at the Rambam and a few modern approaches as well, I think this comes down to this issue of safek, which is interesting. That here we have a question of a doubt, right? We don't know if she actually committed adultery or not. And if you think about it in Torah, we don't really like doubts. It was another ritual we do when we have a doubt over murder, right? We have Egla Arufa, right? The whole idea of the sacrifice that we do there. If we find a dead body, we don't know exactly who killed the person. There's this idea that we want to eliminate safek, doubt. But the rabbis are still bothered, right, by this idea of all the same issues that we had about the ceremony, the fact that, and they try to reframe it, as we said, to bring it back into a regular kind of baked-in, at least a little more evidence-based approach. But again, it's still something that's very bothersome, and something that I wanted to point out, two kind of options. One is we're going to look at the Rambam, and then to talk about, if this was optional, why would any woman go through with this? And I'll present one final idea, and we'll have a chance to kind of discuss and break it down together. So the Rambam, in Moreh Nevuchim, brings an interesting idea. I think we touched upon this before, that he focuses much more on the ritual. And he basically says that the point of having this humiliating ritual, he doesn't even talk about and again, he's coming from, ultra-rationalist opinion about did the water hurt her, did the water not hurt her, was that miracle happening or not, but just she has to go through a humiliating ritual. And he says, let's read it in English over here, right, these ordinances oblige every married woman to take extreme care in her behavior and to have recourse to the greatest precautions, lest the heart of her husband be incensed on her account, for she anticipates with apprehension the horror of the waters of the woman suspected of adultery.
Then just skip a little bit, right? They would even prefer death to this great shame, which consisted in uncovering the woman's head, undoing her hair, tearing her garments, so her heart is exposed, and making her go round through the whole sanctuary in the presence of the public. For these apprehensions, grave evils have been cut short that would have destroyed the order of a certain number of households. Not saying I agree with this, just to put it as part of the conversation. The Rambam is talking about how perhaps, maybe the ends justify the means, but this idea that why have this humiliating ceremony? It's not like we're going to keep everyone in line, and maybe we could frame it not just, the problem is it hurts the woman, more than the men, but he saw this as a way to kind of enforce social norms. How do we enforce social norms and make sure people are behaving appropriately? Perhaps this will act as a deterrent to adultery. Interesting, again, we have, the whole other list of, issues and whether or not this solves that or not, but an interesting kind of way to bring this together. And the last thing I wanted to share, and then we'll have a chance kind of to unpack this over here, is this idea of kind of what is the goal of the woman going through the ceremony. So I gave you a quote from kind of just a book I was reading that discusses this a little bit. I wanted to bring up an idea by Rabbi Hanan Samet, who teaches in Machon Herzog in Israel, and he brings an interesting idea about sota as well. And they kind of spin the sota ritual on its head. We had thought before, perhaps the goal is to punish a guilty woman. Like, we need to find, this guilt. We don't have witnesses, but we have the suspicion, so we're going to do this trial, and if she's guilty, she's going to get punished. They say no. Maybe the goal isn't to prove her guilt, but it's actually to prove her innocence. And they kind of paint the scene that you have a situation where, right, a woman has been accused, right? We don't have proof, right? And we have a way out, right? Either, if the husband can divorce her, right, as we said with a ketubah, she can take, she can get divorced without the ketubah, and she can decide not to go through with it. But what if we want to create a situation, for whatever reason, that the husband and wife decide they want to stay together? Or let's say she decides it's in her best interest financially, for whatever reason, to stay together with the husband, and she wants to restore her good name. And she wants to restore, again, these accusations have been, going through the community, and she wants to restore her name. This basically allows for her to go through this ceremony, right? She's not being dunked in the river, right? To drink water that inherently is not actually going to hurt her. And then at the end, there's almost this stamp by God saying that what? Look, she's innocent. You have to reaccept her back in the community. Things can go on, and it almost gives that approach for the couple, if they choose to do so, right? To kind of move on with their lives, and whether something happened or whether something didn't happen, at the end of the day, if nothing happens with the ritual, right? If nothing happens with the water and she's fine at the end, then what can we say? Listen, clearly nothing happened. And again, we could talk about whether that's because, depending, whether it's a more academic approach or not, what happened with the miracle, did the water actually do anything or not? Practically, she doesn't have to do anything dangerous, and now the community or / her husband, perhaps in this context, right, are now satisfied, okay, nothing happened. And something that's interesting also, that I thought when I was reading this, and scholars point this out, also that the text says if she's innocent, what's going to happen?
Right.
She's going to have a child. But if you think about it, this was a woman who was accused of adultery, and then she gets pregnant. What's everyone usually going to say? No, it's the father, right? But now we have it's stamped by approval by this God-sanctioned ritual. It doesn't solve all the other issues, but now this God-sanctioned ritual is what? This son came from the water, so clearly this son belongs to the original father, and no one's going to be calling that person a mamzer or anything like that. Because again, we're not talking about Adam, proof, witnesses, then we deal with that, right? And we also hurt her husband, etc., etc. This is all in a case of safek and doubt. How can we resolve this? If the couple decides they don't want to, take the path of divorce, and for whatever reason they want to go forward, is this an option they can do? Sorry, I saw just one more point, and that's, and Rav Samet, in a similar vein, brings up the last source in the Gemara Chulin, and again, obviously this is not saying anything against, divorce, but I think as people pointed out, in the ancient Near, or at least in time of the Gemara, that could be a precarious path for a woman. She might choose for whatever, even if it's, not a, happy marriage, she might choose this path just for financial stability. And Marmar, Gadol Shalom Shebein Ish Ve'ishto She'arei Amrat Torah Shmo Shel Kadosh Baruch Hu Shenata B'Kedusha Yimchei Al Hamayim, right? The idea that it's for the, and again, it's not like, you can even say it's almost an internal value, right? That it's for the sake of peace that God allows His name to be, erased for the water that she drinks. Or we started off, and I think there is still an element of that can bother us. It does bother us. Definitely bothers me, right? They're no, we're erasing God's name for this ritual that humiliates the woman. But at least this is saying no. She can opt out in the new version, right? And we're erasing God's name so that
if she wants to kind of continue and clear her name, that can happen, whether we kind of, accept that or not. So I want to take a few hands, then we'll kind of just finally wrap up. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Okay. Any other thoughts, reactions? Okay, so I think that through our analysis of this today, I don't know if this has solved any issues. I think part of kind of this sheer series, again, of troubling text is just being able to struggle with them as a group, being able to learn different approaches, whether it solves issues, whether it perhaps creates many more issues. But again, I think while going through this, it's interesting just to think about the different ways. First of all, that it's not just us struggling with text, Chazal, we're struggling with it, the Rambam, whether we see it in the time of the Mishnah, like lots of people are, lots of, different Rabbanim and scholars are struggling with the same text that we do. I think it's an interesting question to think about today also, you just look through the news, the current issue of the day, right, is accusations, right? And accusations when we do have cause, accusations when we don't have cause, and I think there's two ways to perhaps to look at that or connect that, right? On one hand, there is an element in the Sota ritual of like, if you did something wrong and we can't prove it, God will punish you, right? And an idea of almost like, don't think you get away with certain things. I think we can read through the news of different people who've been accused and, who perhaps are, who people who've been accused who are guilty and who might escape punishment. But this idea of almost here, you won't be able to escape at least divine punishment. But at the same time, this idea also of what about the victims? And if a woman is being accused of this, perhaps this is a way that she might choose, despite the humiliating aspects, to kind of regain her reputation. And again, this idea perhaps of it's not just about leaving things in safek, in doubt, but doing investigations when accusations are made and trying to kind of bring that together. So I don't know if that solves any problems. Take two final comments, I guess, and then if anyone has questions, I'm happy to stick around. Yeah.
But if she's innocent and goes to all this and,
Yeah.
in a way, instead of a couple being together, it's almost like sticking it to the husband, so he looks like,
Right. And no, you're right. It might be perhaps it's like a more triumphant one, that she's like willing to do this, her head
All
held
of this,
high,
yeah.
and then she retains, she doesn't lose anything, or at least also I think the idea of a child, right? The child's name and the continuation. But yeah, it's definitely, I don't know what I would have done in that situation, right? It's definitely a situation where she didn't have the rights where women would have today for recourses.
But if she has a right to deny and she still does it in a way she's like showing the husband, see, this is what I did.
And I think that's an interesting kind of different, right, it
Different way to look at it,
spins the
yeah.
ritual a little bit on its head. I mean, I still wouldn't call it the feminist ritual of the year,
I also think that once somebody's been accused, they're always tainted, even if they're friends.
That's true.
Right, and perhaps this was a way to, right, and we saw like, even if you could say, oh, she drank the water, nothing happened, but people are gonna say, oh, no, she had some mitzvahs she did, and that's why it's delayed, and let's see what happens in 5 years, so.
But again, that's one opinion in the Mishnah,
For
which
sure.
is countered by someone else, who says that doesn't happen.
For sure. I have to go teach, but thank you so much, and if you have questions, I'm happy to answer for a couple of minutes, and otherwise, hopefully see you all next week. Stay warm.